Happy Tuesday, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is Bryan and myself. And what we're going to have is a little bit of a follow-up episode to 2 episodes ago. We talked about preparing for your summer shreds. And in doing so, we just find it important anytime we are speaking around something like a calorie deficit where there can be a negative aspect to it, that we frame the conversation a little bit more robustly. So today we are going to cover basically what limits how long you can be in a deficit and some of our ideas around that may be very beneficial for you in implementing it. Before we jump into the meat and potatoes of today's episode, Bryan, what's going on?
Yeah, this is the last few hours in San Diego for us. So tomorrow morning at circa 5 a.m., we'll be leaving for our road trip, trying to make it all the way to like Moab on the first day, which is going to be like 12 hours with no stops and probably more like 14 with stops. So big day of driving ahead of us, which also means that today, right after we get off this podcast, is my very final training session in San Diego. So a little bittersweet. I've kind of began to endear being in the commercial gym and kind of absorbing the energy of the people around me. I think that probably that's my favorite part of being in the commercial gym, is just that energy that permeates the entire building. And it almost motivates you to work a little bit harder. Like that idea that someone's watching you, even though nobody is and nobody cares, right? But like, yo, that fucking swole dude over there, that really hot chick over there, like is totally watching me right now as I do these leg extensions. So that's been kind of cool, and it's been fun. Just having a different perspective on things. And of course, I'm going to miss access to some of the prime equipment and stuff like that too. But equally excited to get back home and have access back to all of the things that I have metrics on and diagnostics, and I can see how these 5 weeks have actually gone as far as, you know, whether strength has been gained or lost or stayed the same or whatever it is. So like I said, a bit bittersweet, but looking forward to my final session today. I have upper body. Oh, and then yesterday, I had a really cool pendulum squat as my final session for quads in San Diego. So, I have the pendulum at home that I do all the time. So it's not like a pendulum squat is a new movement that I'm introducing where you necessarily wouldn't expect a ton of neural or skill adaptations along the way. However, it is a new brand, a different machine. So I think that you would expect there to be some neural adaptations. But either way, I basically started in my first week here in San Diego with 4 plates on the pendulum and got 8 reps and literally almost failed the 8th rep, like came to a grinding stop in the middle and then somehow like pushed my way through. And then this week, 4.5 weeks later, I put 4 plates plus 15 pounds on there, and I got 8 reps with maybe 1 RIR. Like it didn't come to a stop in the middle, but it certainly slowed pretty drastically. And so I don't know how much of that is in fact like neural or skill adaptations to the machine versus whether, I actually made some progress while we were here. But for sure, I'm up 15 pounds. The effort was equal or slightly less. And then on top of that, I PR'd my sissy squats for the first time in months. Like I'd been basically just hitting 45 pounds for 9, 45 pounds for 9, 45 pounds for 9, week after week after week. And then this week I got 10. And so that was pretty cool. Like I don't know if it was just a good day or what, but increasing pendulum consistently, PRing the sissy squat. It was a really solid quality day of training, and looking forward to today to do upper body stuff for the final session. You're on mute.
Updates from me. I had to deal with the internet of Verizon for a very long time last night, and it got the best of me. As much as we enjoy the travel lifestyle, I have been increasingly looking forward to the day when I just have a home and I'm not like my bullshit meter is getting close to filled with like dealing with internet things and like stopgap solutions and like piecing things together. So that's been hitting me a little bit. Like last night was pretty brutal. But the positive side is I have been I've hit this stretch where I am loving working right now. I've worked straight through the past 2 weekends and have just really, really been enjoying it. I'm feeling super creative and super motivated at my positioning in the space and what I'm delivering to my clients. And I'm really just trying to capitalize on as much time as I have doing that. So that's been a very, very awesome feeling. I'm loving the standing desk. I kind of converted cold turkey. I literally don't even have a chair here. And the only thing that will bother me is like my heels will start to get sore towards the, it's 9:10 at night and I'm still standing here. So that will happen a little bit. And then lastly, with training, I have been really enjoying, I'm at this gym that's not well equipped, not by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the things that I'm really implementing that was a big takeaway from the N1 practical is when Cassim was like, just be creative and explore. And now that I know what I am looking for with like positionings and movements, I'm just getting creative with recreating them. Like I don't have a seated row, but there's a cable stack. And I'm like, oh, well, if I pull the bench over here and there's this like 2x4 that I can shove underneath and wedge my feet into, like I can recreate that rear delt row like perfectly. I just grab my angles 90 grips and then I attach them to a straight bar and like I can set up my angle. I'm like, this is perfect. So it's just like thinking outside the box and using your imagination and the knowledge you have of which position you want to recreate and then what tools you have at your disposal to recreate them. And that's been really, really fun. So that's been sweet. But other than that, not too much, just enjoying another opportunity to just continue doing what I do and making the most out of it. I've been feeling really, really grateful for that lately.
Yeah, totally, man. I love the idea of just being creative at the gym. It kind of makes the process fun too. So huge fan of that. I have one more quick update too. And when we started the Follow My Program, I briefly talked about how we would have to do a metabolic phase at some point, and I kind of was tongue in cheek, oh, that's not really looking forward to that one. Well, I'm gonna do it. Starting March 28th, we're gonna have a deload week. So next week, I have a little small mouth surgery thing that's happening next week as well. So that's just perfect for that to be like a deload week for the program. And then starting the following Monday, I think April 4th, we're going to jump into what I think will be a 4-week metabolic phase. I'm going to do 2 weeks systemic, where it's kind of like circuit style, compound movement type thing, just kind of increasing work capacity systemically. And then the next 2 weeks after that will probably be the more like local peripheral muscle endurance type training. So I'll say 3 to 5 weeks. I think 4 is probably going to be the number, but something like that for a metabolic cycle. And that is actually going to coordinate with the start of my deficit. So this is one of the things we talked about on the Shredz podcast 2 episodes ago, was, starting your diet early and kind of getting ahead of the curve there. And that is something that I think I want to do. I thought about it, I ruminated on it, and this way, starting the diet essentially in the end of March, early April, is going to give me 3 full months to hit it before I go on vacation for July 4th weekend to Wisconsin. And what I would love is to be able to have the diet completed by that point instead of having to take like a 2-week diet break and then jump back into the diet. So I think that actually transitions relatively well into our discussion of what limits how long you can be in a deficit. Because for me, I know that if I'm going 3 months, that's pretty much the end of it unless there's a diet break in there. So the decision for me will essentially have to come, if I'm going to put a diet break in there, I almost need to do it before the 14 weeks. Like by the time I get to Wisconsin, it will have been 14 weeks. At that point, I don't know if I want to do a diet break and jump back into a diet anyways. So at some point in the middle of those 14 weeks, I'll make a decision as to, hey, am I behind schedule and I may need that diet break in Wisconsin? Well, then I probably need another diet break at some point earlier on too. So I know for me, like 12 to 14 weeks of dieting without a small hiatus in there is just too much. But what do you think? What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, what I like is we have a practical example to talk about, right? So the first thing I think that limits not necessarily how long can you, but how long should you, is what is the ambition of your goal, right? So Bryan, I'm going to pose this to you because we have this perfect working example. What is the goal of your diet for this season?
Yeah, I mean, so last time I got down to 182, right? And that was pretty lean for me. But I would say that that's about the goal this time too. Unfortunately, I don't have the very important data of what I actually weigh at the moment because I haven't had a scale here for 5 weeks. I've weighed myself post workout at the gym, but that's, with liquids and food in me and a pump and clothes and all that stuff. So I think I could render a guess that I'm in the mid to high 190s. So using that as a general starting place, that would mean that I have 16 pounds to lose or something along those lines. And we had the discussion the other day about how, the first 5 pounds that you lose are really fast and they're not really even fat. So I may only have 12 pounds of actual fat to lose and like 4 pounds of glycogen and water and food volume and stuff like that. In which case, 12 to 14 weeks probably seems like a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So it's a really cool talking point because, like you said, that first week when you button things up, you're consistent, you're gonna drop the most weight that week. And like I said, weight, not necessarily fat. And then from there, you're like, hey, right, about a 0.5% to 1%, right, even on average on either end ends up being around a pound or so. And then you have I have 12 weeks for that. So I think that is it's an easy frame up and it makes sense with the ambition of, hey, this is about how lean I was last time, assuming that you may have slightly more, ever so slightly more tissue, or you do a better job at maintaining the tissue that you have as you diet. That's about my ballpark again. And it's a really, really easy plan. So I think for that, like 12 weeks, and that's to get really lean. But let's face it, Bryan, you're already lean. You're probably 12, 13% body fat, 14
I
maybe.
don't know. I feel like 15 maybe. It's just like, I guess the way you define what body fat percentages are, and you always have to remember that people with a lot of muscle can make higher body fat percentages look good still. So I think with my body fat, it's always ambiguous and difficult to tell because I hold most of that fat in my glutes and legs, which you don't always see. And so I can have that 6-pack and still have some lines in my delts and stuff when I believe I'm probably at 15% body fat. So, if I were to have to render a guess right now, I would say 15, is my guess, but, I could be wrong on that. I don't know.
Gotcha. Yeah, it is interesting. I'm the complete opposite, right? I will hold mine in that more android region in my stomach. I'm in 196, 197 right now, fasted in the morning. When I'm training legs, I still have veins all through my quads and stuff like that, but my abs are not there.
Yeah, I don't have veins in my quads at 182 pounds even. They look more diced, obviously, and separated between the musculature, but I don't have any veins or anything like that. So for me, I have an ab vein at 12% body fat, but I don't have any quad veins at 8% body fat.
Yes, and it's the complete opposite for me. I have to be dumb lean before I get actually decent abs and stuff. So it's interesting. We're all gonna have differences in that, and that's going to come back to one, male versus female, right? Fat storage pattern, hormone patterning, and then also just individual variation too. So kind of jumping back on track, right? With how long you can be in the deficit, the ambition of your goal is the first one, right? That's obviously the more ambitious you are, the longer it will go. Secondly, how far are you from that goal, right? That's a really, really big one. You can have not a very, and by the ambition of your goal, I really mean how lean do you want to be, right? An 8% body fat for a male, right? We're speaking in terms of males on this show. It's going to be a longer attempt just because it takes more to get to those lower body fat percentages. If your goal is 15%, I wouldn't consider this like very overly ambitious unless your starting point is like maybe 30% or something like that. Like I was just having this conversation with a client earlier this morning before we recorded the show, and mapping out realistically how far away and how long that might take us. So ambition being the first one. Second being proximity from your goal. Because in the earlier weeks, right, or when you're starting at a larger body fat percentage, you can lose more with more body fat with less risk of catabolizing your lean body mass. As you start at a leaner body weight, that risk, let's call it a risk for sure, of catabolizing lean body mass as a fuel substrate goes up. It's just the nature of the beast, right? You can't completely. There's some strategies you can use, which we've covered in different episodes, but it's wishful thinking to say I'm going to maintain 100% of my lean body mass as I diet. So that's a second big thing. Anything you want to add onto that one, Bryan?
No, I think that's definitely the point about how lean you're going to get is ultimately the biggest thing, because we know that as you get closer to that goal, that the percentage of weight loss that you can do week to week without feeling the compromising effects is going to decrease. And I talked about my own personal example, I think on the last two episodes as well, 2 episodes ago, where I referenced that, the first 10 pounds went off in like 6 weeks. And then the last 10 weeks, I lost 6 pounds. So it like completely flip-flopped and reversed. And that's just because it gets harder. You have to be so much more adherent. You have to be more uncomfortable, and you just have less overall fat to lose. So definitely that goal is super important. And so for me, going from like 15 to 8 would be way different than me going from like 20 to 12 or something along those lines.
Exactly. The next part that I wanted to talk about is where in your priority of life does this come into play, right? Because the longer it goes, the more of a priority it kind of needs to be, because in order to continue to facilitate fat loss in the later stages, it requires you to run a tighter ship. So, example being, if you are let's use Bryan example, right? So, I mean, we've talked about this before. We've had the conversation and you've kind of brought it up where, hey, you're a family man, right? And it's like, does attaining these leaner body compositions and me having to further restrict what might be like a date night or a vacation or something like that, like, is there an added benefit there? And obviously that trade-off is going to be different for every single person, but where you find that answer, and is this just impacting me? Is this now beginning to impact like my relationship with my wife or husband or children? That comes into play as well. So if you are fortunate enough to be a lone wolf like myself per se, I can diet for pretty much as long as I want. It doesn't really impact anyone else because there's no direct dependencies on me, or there's no one who's like, Aaron, but I want to go get pizza this weekend or whatever. Like, it's just me. So where I can diet for like 20 weeks if I wanted to, because it's literally just me, that there's no other responsibilities for me to handle or for me to take over for anyone else. You may not find yourself in that, I would say, let's call it a luxury. And it's important to realize, like, your wife, your husband probably doesn't care if you go from like 10% body fat to 7% body fat, but they probably do care the extra, 7-8 weeks that might take, and what that means for like date night, flexibility, hanging out with friends type of thing. And that one's a really, really important conversation to have with those people that are important in your life.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of equate that of like you being, untied to children and family as much to like doing the diet without a timeline. Because if you just know that it's an open-ended period where you can kind of have these moments of more freedom, then it makes the experience a little bit more like it may be for you, where there's less pressures and things like that, because the occasional going out and things like that doesn't feel like as much of a break from protocol, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, that's for sure something you have to account for. And it also becomes harder as the diet goes on to fit those calories in. Like for me in the beginning of a diet, especially coming from California right now, where I've been eating out a lot and like putting a lot of, unknown oils into my body and things like that. I literally should be able to lose weight for a number of weeks going forward, even continuing to go out to eat once a week, because that's less than 4 times a week. So it's kind of relative to where you're coming from with that stuff too. But for sure, like the way that I personally deal with the idea of going out and being a family man during these times is that it's just using the skills that we have taught here on the podcast and that we've learned ourselves, in that, you can balance calories throughout the week, and it's not a day-to-day thing where, oh no, I went over today, my diet is totally screwed up. It's just like, hey, you plan for that. And if you have a date night on Friday night, that Monday through Thursday, maybe you cut 200 calories off of each day, so you have an extra 800 to eat on Friday, and now you have a refeed day and the diet continues, and there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you even have like a squat session the day after the refeed, and you put it to good use.
Exactly. Yeah. The one thing that I will add onto the back of that for myself, because I'll obviously share things around like, my own periodization and stuff like that on Instagram, but this is my job. You know what I mean? So for me, I can internalize things different because, for me, and just being fully transparent, it's very important to me that I coach from a place of experience, right? So if I have a client that wants to get to like 7% body fat, and I've never been to 7% body fat, I understand the theory, but I don't understand the application. I don't have conviction in the application because I haven't been there yet. So for me, there's this blend of like professional and personal type things where it might be like, yeah, like when I wrapped up my diet last year, like I didn't really care to get any leaner, and that's why I stopped, because there's just no benefit for me. But then if there's a point where like, let's say eventually I start taking clientele who want to get on stage, right? That last diet, I was 8.2 on a DEXA. Going from 8.2 to 5 is a whole new beast. And for me, like I would be like, well, I'm compartmentalizing this as like a 3-month, investment in my coaching experience in business to go through this myself so that I understand its implications on sex hormones, right? And the conversations you have to have with your partner on why you have zero interest in, having sex because you're so lean and you've been dieting for the last like 9 months, type of thing. And all these other things that kind of come out of that. So when you are looking at things that other people are doing or their durations, it's important to understand their specific contexts, and they may have reasons that are different for yours. So that's another big part to look into there.
Yep. When you're working with a client, what kind of tools do you use to assess their level of metabolic adaptation that's occurring throughout the deficit?
So what I will do is I will never get, I don't want to say never because I don't like speaking in absolutes. It is incredibly rare that I will have a client start with a periodization of a calorie deficit. Right. So one thing that I've really moved to is like a prove to me type of thing. Like prove to me you can thrive at maintenance. Prove to me that you have that you can sustain your body weight on a high level of maintenance calories. Because like any coach who's gone through their paces, I've been down that road before, and I've had clients who we've failed to get through fat loss periodizations because there was a bunch of red flags going off, and I just didn't have enough experience to read them. So it still is interesting. Like once you work with enough clients, you start to notice patterns, and you'll have like 2 clients, right, who are within 1 to 2 inches of each other, within a handful of pounds of each other. One is losing, between that point, 0.5% to 1% total body mass. I messed up my words there, but whatever. You guys get what I'm saying. You're within that those bounds that we explained earlier at 2,400 calories, right? That next client who has the same amount of, weight, approximate same body fat percentage, they're training roughly the same, he needs to be at 1,900, right? So there are these big gaps between people, and that's where things start going off. Like, that's why I want blood work out of my clients, because I want to be able to spot these things before we even attempt a fat loss phase, because there's no point in going through it if we know that it's going to be an uphill battle. If testosterone's already super low, if they are showing signs of like adrenal insufficiency or something like that, like success leaves clues, and as does failure as well. And then it's, as you spend enough time and you're fortunate enough to have enough clientele to begin looking at trends, you can then explain to them like, hey, I've been down this road before. These are our options, you know? And it's one of those things. It's, yeah, there's a lot there. And you just have to look at all the clues and put together the pieces, really.
Yeah. So, but does when someone spends this time at maintenance with you, does that give you a sense of how adaptive their metabolism is? Because wouldn't that more be a reflection of whether they're gaining weight, losing weight at different calorie amounts, right?
Yeah. So people with the like most adaptive, I should say, is you will continuously keep feeding them, right? And their weight is staying the same. And you have to reduce different things. Like I have a client right now, I had to tell him like, listen, you need to stop walking. Like your step count is just too high, or else we're just going to have to keep putting food in you. But like eventually our digestion and stuff is going to tank, right? We can only put so many carbohydrates in you before it starts to become a problem for digestion. Like it's easier for you just to get less steps than for me to continue feeding you. I mean, I think this client, we're at like a 24x body weight multiplier, and we're only averaging like 0.8 pound, a week on average. And it's not, yeah. And he's lean too. So I'm like, listen, dude, you just got to stop fucking walking so much.
That's a huge multiplier.
Yeah, it's absurd. So it's really, really interesting. Like the adaptive metabolism, it's going to vary person to person. Generally, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so with that person who is eating that many calories, using him as the avatar, like would you, because it's so adaptive going up, would you then expect it to be just as adaptive going down? So maybe this dude now has to diet on like an absurdly low amount of calories, or like what kind of clues do we find to be able to figure that out?
The clues for those, that's going to be very person to person. So it is a possibility. However, the upside is when you've spent the last 9-10 months eating an absurd amount of food, you are in a very, very leveraged position to then start a calorie deficit, because I mean, you can know or you can assume, but like that exact client, we literally just grabbed labs last week. Everything looks great, right? Like hormones are fantastic. Thyroid is absolutely fantastic. There are 0 red flags. So when he is ready, we know that things are, or when he does want to change his goals or whatever, like we know he's in a good spot. The clientele whose weight is stable on what would be considered like a low estimation of their maintenance calories, those are where you have to really be trepidatious in your approach, because like metabolic resiliency isn't there. Those are the people who like their weight fluctuates wildly after like a meal or two out on the weekend. They're up 5 or 6 pounds come Monday, that sort of thing. Like those are the clues that I'm talking about. And you're like, with those calorie deficits, you want to be really, really cognizant and have that clear communication with them of like, hey, now that we're dieting, like we want to tighten the ship, because the last thing, and this is really the part of the reason I wanted to have this episode, is once you get into those waters considered like you're fucking around. Like, oh, I'm at a calorie deficit, but like my weight's not changing. I'm not losing fat. Like now you're just underfeeding yourself. And when you get in that cycle, you're just kind of digging that hole, whatever the reasons of why you have that hole, of why the deficit isn't quite working as well for you. You're just digging that hole deeper. You're just like, burning time type of deal. So with those clients, it's important to frame that as like, hey, we've just reversed and things are in a better spot now, but we want to be really cognizant of like digestion. Now is not the time to be super flexible with your, lifestyle type thing. Like, let's get our fat loss and let's get the hell out. And those clients may need a few iterations of like your nutritional periodization loops to really get themselves into like a much more like resilient metabolic position.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So I guess when you're looking at the different avatars of metabolic adaptation, like you have that guy who, he can eat a lot of food on the higher end, and we don't exactly know yet, but you could suspect that he won't be super adaptive on the way down. Like he'll still get a decent amount of calories. I guess on the flip side of that, you have the person that is super adaptive going down and has to like diet on super low calories, and then is not as adaptive going up, and they don't even get to eat that many calories when they're bulking, so to speak, which that's quite unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, it's like their bulk happens more easily, which is like a slippery slope, because you don't want to put weight on too fast because we just busted our ass to have it come off type of thing. Yep.
Yeah. So in regards to this idea of how long you can be in a deficit, like we can look at, The Godfather, Jeff Alberts, as an example of somebody that has gone through multiple diets, contest preps, where he's done it over the course of a year. And of course, there have been like, a couple diet breaks, and there's been refeed days and stuff like that. But I know we've mentioned this on the podcast way long ago, but since we haven't addressed it in a number of months, maybe even 6 months here, what are your thoughts on kind of that idea as it applies? I don't think anyone that isn't getting on stage would apply that to like their life and be like, I'm just going to diet for the next year. But maybe somebody would extrapolate that out and like, I'd rather diet over 6 months and take 3 diet breaks for 2 weeks each than try to do that diet in 3 or 4 months, So what about the applicability or your thoughts on that approach versus a more like directed approach where there's less kind of flip-flopping of the diet breaking and stuff like that?
Yeah, what I would say is, does the 6-month diet stand to dramatically improve your health? Right? If we're talking around a 5'10" to 6 foot male who's starting at 280 pounds at 35% body fat, a 6-month outlook of a diet to maybe and their goal is to get to 18% body fat will dramatically improve their health. In that context, yes, 6 months of dieting, right? Calorie deficit, but it's for the outlook of dramatically improving your health in biology as a human being. Yes, that is a fantastic approach. If you think that you need 6 months of dieting because when you go to the beach in June that the girls are going to want you, I got news for you. They don't give a fuck. So in that case, it's probably going to detract more from your life. But with that, when you don't have as much of a gap to close with the deficit, it becomes hard to discern your progress well, right? If you're only losing 15 pounds, right? Let's say that. And you extrapolate that over 6 months, and you're taking like multiple like weeks, like 3 weeks in a row of a diet break. Now it's been, let's say 6 weeks. You're sure 4 or 5 weeks even. The delta between the start and end, like it's really not much. And you're kind of getting into like what I call that like fucking around period, where it would be beneficial to like either return calories to maintenance like deliberately, or choose a shorter timeline where you won't have like vacations, trips plans sort of thing.
Yeah, I like that. I was also thinking about this on like a personal level, as far as like if I were to ever take it to stage, like what would be the approach that I would implement. And I don't think I would ever get to the point where I was large enough to warrant like a year-long diet, kind of like Jeff was doing. I think he started at something like 210 and got to 170. So he was like 40 pounds over the course of a year. But I do think that the way I probably would approach it would be to take like 3 or 4 months and get down to like 180-ish, and then take like a month-ish and build back up and above maintenance, maybe maintenance or a maintenance and a little higher, just to potentially get out of that deficit and put out the fire, maybe, so to speak, and then take like another 3 or 4 months and get from that like 185 to 170 or whatever the number is where I would need to be on stage. And so at that point, you're looking at like 3 or 4 months plus a month diet break and then another 3 or 4 months. And that could be 8 or 9 months, you know? So that's kind of how I look at it for myself, but that's certainly a lot of time of being on fire.
Yeah. And but the ambition is huge, right? It's natural bodybuilding, which is you need to be stupid lean and you don't have any of the help of exogenous hormone replacement that keeps your muscle mass or even increases your muscle mass as you go in, right? So I don't know if extreme is a great term to use, but it is a unicorn use case, right? That many people will never find themselves in. For me, with that approach, what I would do is, at that starting point, DEXA scan, right? And obviously, like, I wouldn't recommend living my lifestyle where you're getting DEXA scans at different places. Like, you go back to the same place and your reports are there. DEXA scan when you start. You diet for 12 weeks. Okay, how much lean body mass have I lost between my start DEXA and next DEXA? I'm going to spend 6 weeks trying to only put on enough weight to reclaim all of that lean body mass. And now I've reclaimed it, but I have 6-7 pounds less fat. Great. I have all of my gains, less of my fat, and then use that iterative approach, because like with natural bodybuilding, and now I'm speaking outside of where I feel very convicted in my views because I have no experience doing it. The best natural bodybuilders, right, on stage are able to maintain as more lean body mass as they diet. Because like in the later stages of it, once, like as a natural, like once you cross like a certain threshold of leanness, you start sacrificing a bit of lean body mass to further facilitate those lower numbers of body fat percentage. So the better you can maintain as you get to that, maintain the gains you already had made, that's really, really good.
Yeah. I feel like the last thing I have on this is to speculate on this idea that you brought up earlier of, you know, an advanced athlete that's dieting down. Like, if I get back to 182, would you feel more confident estimating or guessing that my 182 looks better because I put more muscle on during my gaining phase, or that I got better at dieting and have a little more muscle at 182 because I lost less muscle on the way down, right? So they're basically the same thing. And at an advanced level, it could be fucking half a pound of each, you know? But anyway, do you have any thoughts on speculating on that? Or is it just that, like a speculation and a guess at best?
Yeah, what my ego and what I want to be true is the former, right? No, dude, you just put more body, you just got more jacked than you were last year. But the pragmatic in me is like, nah, you probably just got a little bit refined your dieting expertise, right, or precision and were able to maintain more of it as you dieted. Realistically, I think it's a combination of both, right? And you know, we're splitting hairs here, but like I'm still getting better, right? Like I'm the best I've ever looked at 196 now. Like when I diet down, the numbers stay about the same. They don't change much, but I'm like, I didn't have these veins when I was here last year type of thing. Like, okay, I'd never had veins in my legs until like last year. So, and now I have them in the 196s where like the first time I dieted down to like the 190, I didn't have them. So like, okay, well, I'm figuring something out. It's just over like from an absolute standpoint, those differences are marginal, but from a relative standpoint, the differences are noticeable. I think I got that right. I might have fucked that up. But
yeah.
No.
I know what you mean. Do you think that part of the increased vascularity could be related to just aging processes of like, you know, skin thinning and veins moving closer to the surface? And I'm not trying to just say this to be contrary, but it's something that I was thinking about literally just the other day. So it's really funny that you brought it up, but I was walking around and, you know, non-workout situation, just hanging out at the beach with the kids. And I've been eating, plenty, but I noticed that I had a cross vein in my bicep. Like I always have the one that goes up the vertical, but I usually have to get quite lean to see the cross vein. And I was just hanging out and realized, oh my God, like it's there, and it's not just like kind of there, it's like really there. And so my first thought was what you said, to be like, fuck yeah, I've put muscle on, like absolutely, like my biceps have grown type thing. And then I kind of thought about it, reflected on it, and tried to look at it from the other side. And I was like, maybe it's like the skin is thinning, you're getting older, the veins are being pushed more to the surface. Like I don't know these things, but
I don't have an opinion on that, right? And I think we'll have to have someone on. Maybe we'll bring on like Nuno or something like that who knows that, and can speak to it. But to me, with mine, it's like my legs, right? And I'm like, I've finally, after years of trying, like I finally learned how to train quads, properly, and because it's like always a moving target, but like they are way better than they used to be. And this is where it gets hard to discern, because then we'll have like conversations with like Dave McConey, right? And he's like, well, tell me what the numbers are. And they don't really change that much. And we kind of know, but it's like if the last time I measured my quad when I was like 15% body fat, now I'm at 10, like they're going to be smaller to some degree because I have less fat in them too. So when you're taking measurements, it's there, you need to bring in the context of your body fat percentage at those measurements.
Or body weight
as well.
Yeah, like me at 195 compared to me at 195 type thing. But yeah, he always wants that concrete data. And I'm just like, dude, I don't have it, So yeah, I mean, like for me, the comparison is the pictures under the same lighting from the prior year compared to the pictures under the same lighting from this year. But like to his point, it's not the exact same. Like there are differences potentially in like even if I'm a half hour off and the sun is in like a different place in the sky or something along those lines, like that can change the way it looks. So it's just super ambiguous.
Yeah. But I mean, that is why my biggest fear, the biggest thing that I never want, is to be like a charlatan or someone who's just like, well, this is what I think and it's this way, believe me type thing. I want to be able to have backup data and be like, okay, and that's why whenever I'll make posts, they'll be like, this is what I did with my DEXA, right? They're always at 9 a.m. They're always fasted. I always take the day off training, before. I just try and minimize my variables, because I don't want to be promoting bad information. Because one thing is, it's hard when it's yourself because you have an emotional investment into the outcome, right? If I go in to get a DEXA scan and it tells me I put on muscle and I'm leaner, right? I am emotionally invested in the positivity of that outcome. Of course I want it, but I do try and do my best to be like, okay, well, I don't want to like promote, misinformation. Am I crossing my T's and dotting my I's here? Did I do my due diligence in preparing, or did I load more glycogen the night before? So it's like really important for me. So that's where like the data thing is. I've gotten a lot better at collecting it for those reasons specifically. And kind of earlier in the podcast when I talked about how I'm like, as much as the travel lifestyle is fun, I'm really excited for when we settle down, is because I'm going to go to that fucking DEXA scan place every 3 months and just fucking stack data, and get labs and stuff in it. I'll be very excited just to even further refine my own bro scientist methodologies.
Yeah, buddy. I'm going to try and find the time to go get a DEXA next week when I'm on my deload week before my diet starts, or right when my diet starts, and do a DEXA then, and then try to do the blood work as well and have those comparisons pre and post and see how it goes. So
if you do them on the same day, DEXA first, then blood work.
Yeah, I remember that because you lost muscle in one limb because it took blood out of it.
It was like 2 pounds less than the other one. I was like, oh, shit.
That's crazy.
Yeah. All right, Bree, anything else you want to add on to this one?
Nope.
Fantastic. As always, guys, I hope this was a fun and informative episode. Any follow-up questions you have for Bryan or I, please send them over to us on Instagram. And then lastly, if this has been something that you find valuable, please share it with your friends. family even, or anyone you think that would benefit. And then Bryan and I don't ask for this often because personally, I hate when people do it, so I try not to. But if you have the time and would like to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would love an honest review of how we are doing and if you are enjoying it. So with that, guys, thank you for listening. As always, Bryan and I will talk to you next week.